Hello, I'm so excited to be in this class with everybody. My name is Anna Chapman, and I will give you a brief introduction about myself, but then I'd love to get to know who you guys are. And so we'll do a brief round of introductions, and I'll throw in the chat what I'd love to hear about. Okay, so you're gonna let everybody know your name, pronouns you use, where are you, what is your current practice, and why are you taking this class? We have a lot to review today, so we're gonna keep the introductions pretty small because we're gonna get to know each other a lot more throughout the class. So just sort of 1 or 2 minutes, if that's all right. And real quick, I am a painter. I grew up on the East Coast in North America, and I studied painting at the Rhode Island School of Design. I lived in New York City for 6 years and studied under various artisans and artists, and learned a whole bunch of different kind of approaches to fine art materials, all the while working on my own art practice. And then I went to get my master's in art education at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is where I am now. And a lot of my thesis research has been plugged into the class that I'm teaching right now. So it's kind of what I call a living syllabus. And I will tell you a bit more about the origins of whose framework I'm building upon after introductions. And yeah, so I'd love to do popcorn style. So I'll select somebody, and if you're not familiar, popcorn style is like you tell us about yourself, and then you popcorn it over to somebody else in the group. And I'm gonna just sort of take some notes on the side, so don't mind me if I'm looking off. All right, so Beth, why don't you start us off?
Hi, yes, my name is Beth. I use she and her pronouns. I am actually in Providence right now. I'm doing a master's at RISD. We have, I'm sure, a lot to talk about in that regard. And I'm in the photography department, but I would say that my practice is largely about questioning materials. And I do a lot of experiments. I just finished teaching a class called Material Makings in the Anthropocene, which was a really fun and interesting class. So I wanted to take this, just one, to build community, to learn from all of you, and three, I'm in the middle of writing my thesis, and so I thought this could be a good outlet. And then I'll pick Ava.
Hi, I'm Ava, she, her. I live in the far north of Canada. I live in the Yukon, which is next door to Alaska, for those of you who might not be familiar. I'm a painter. Predominantly, I make works that are about the land, about changes on the land, about entropy, about water and wetlands and receding glaciers and that sort of thing. I have a bachelor's degree from Nova Scotia College of Art and Design here in the east coast of Canada, and yeah, I think that's about it. I'm here to sort of green up my practice. I've started already to do some natural ink making and the like. I mostly use oil paints, which I feel are a bit more natural than acrylics, but you know, I could do better than that even, I think. Yeah, so questioning the materiality of painting, the stuff we produce. Yeah, nice to meet everybody. Oh, and gosh, I don't see anybody's name. I'll pick Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy, she, her. I am currently in my sister's house in Richmond, Virginia, but I am from Brooklyn, New York. In my current practice, I work with encaustic, which is pigment and beeswax based, and I integrate found materials. So basically everything I do, I either use found metal or found plastics, which I use to create texture, but I don't leave them in because, much like the rest of the world, encaustic paint repels plastic, so I just use it for texture. And I'm really taking this class to see, I like what you said about greening up your practice, but I am kind of wanting to, where can I go from here? How can I use more sustainable and different materials? And how can I make my practice more meaningful beyond just using the materials, but making it sort of with more intention? I guess that's me. So how about Katie?
Hi, my name is Katie Coxstein, she, her, hers. I'm living in Fort Collins, Colorado. I got my degree at Savannah College of Art and Design. I am a photo-based artist. I also work in encaustic occasionally. I do encaustic collage. My work is largely based around a variety of environmental issues, from creating pollinator pathways to lately it's been focused more on air quality, because I'm working with more scientific data and a nonprofit in Denver that's more community-based. So I wanted to bring more sustainability into my actual practice and be able to work with them in a more sustainable manner, since we're talking about doing a youth project as well. So that's it. Thank you. And I will give the popcorn over to Candace.
Hi everyone, I'm Candace Jensen. I use she, her pronouns. I'm located in southeastern Vermont, in Dakina, the land of the Elnu Abenaki. I am a painter, printmaker, and calligrapher. I did both of my degrees down in Philadelphia, and I've lived around the United States. Currently, I'm establishing what I hope to be a regenerative art residency here on land in southern Vermont. And I curate and exhibit in a nonprofit member-run gallery in Brooklyn, where I just had a show that came down, focused on animism and reorienting our cultural perspective toward animacy and interdependence. So these are the things that I've focused on in my work for a really long time. And I think as far as what I want out of this is to build more community around green practice within the studio, but also the larger framework about what that actually looks like and what we do as a community of artists and how we're actually creating conversation and inspiration around what we're focused on. So I really love the multiplicity of layers that I'm hearing in everyone's responses so far. Nice to meet you all. And I will call on Carol.
Hi, everyone. Carol, she, her. I'm from Toronto, Canada, big city. In the summer, I have a cabin in Halliburton, which is northeast of the city, and it's by a lake in the woods. My practice is on paper. It's mixed media. It's centered around memory and sensory experience of nature. I would definitely like to green up my practice, if not go into something that is not product-based and try a whole other kind of experiential artwork. I think that's all. I'm self-taught. I don't have a degree. And I will pick Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Youssef, she, her. I am based out of Los Angeles, California, and I have my BFA in painting and ceramics, and I too have my master's in art education. So I taught at the local public high school for a while, and then about 5 or 6 years ago, got back into my own art practice. I am currently mostly a mixed media artist using recycled and repurposed materials. I'm also training to become an arborist. So a lot of my work deals with how to take trees out of the equation. You know, somebody who loves to work with paper, I'm sort of in direct conflict with that. So yeah, so I'm just trying to get more ideas to have more sustainable practice where I don't have to be so much of a consumer, I guess. I will kick it over to Bree.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Well, it's good to be here. I apologize. I have a puppy in the background, so she might come through here and there while I'm speaking. So I identify as she, her, and I work in education. I do have an art degree in photography, so my practice is really evolving right now, which is what brings me here, because it's kind of both and. It's like I'm seeking ways to, I really fell in love with the development part of photography and being in the darkroom, and the process of bringing more of the abstraction and the conceptual ideas behind my work. So, but of course that's in conflict with how I feel about environment, and as well like trees, like I've just heard. And I want to find different ways to still work with the process and develop some of those same ideas that I was working with before, only not with the chemical use. So I've been working more with clay, and I actually have looked into like creating my own paint pigments, and just kind of transitioning into that, which is also something I want to bring to my students. So I've been partnering with local community nonprofits. We just started a program actually yesterday, or excuse me, on Friday. So it's like trying to figure out like where I am with my own practice now and using material, and how I can also translate this at a community level as well. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to this, and I appreciate everything that we all bring to this new beginning. Oh, and let's see, I'm on my phone. So have we heard from Priscilla?
Thank you, Bree. Hi, everyone. My name is Priscilla Stadler. I'm she, her, or they, them, and it's really good to be here with you all. I'm on Matinacock Munsee land, also known as Queens, New York City. And I am an interdisciplinary visual artist, so I work with a variety of media, both fabric installation, 2 and 3D media, and also have a social and community engagement practice. So I weave a lot of threads together, and they're often connected to vulnerability on both individual and personal levels, as well as community vulnerability in terms of real estate development, displacement, and also, of course, sea level rise, and environmental and global issues. I am really excited about this class. For the past couple of years, I've been exploring underground realms of connection among fungi and tree roots and the symbiotic relationships that they have. And I'm really interested in working in a more earth-focused way, both in terms of materials that I use and conceptually. So part of my mission is to go deeper with my work. And I look forward to being here to do that and to learn from and with all of you. I'm also an educator in my day job, which is at the City University of New York. I do professional development with faculty at a local community college. And I am going to hand it to Riva. Hi, Riva.
Hey, Priscilla. Hello, everyone. I'm Riva, she, her. I'm in New York's Hudson River Valley. And let's see, my practice. I like to say the world is my studio. And I walk, I find, I make, and then I make meaning. I work with a lot of found natural materials, reclaimed materials, and consumer packaging. Those are kind of the three areas I work in. But the last couple of years, I've been struggling a bit with making anything in terms of sort of making more things, like just the thing, the objects and that sort of thing. Although I often work in installation work as well. So the last several years I've been working with the land and with seeds and with native species and trying to eradicate invasive species on the land where I live. So I'm not really making things as much as really digging in the dirt, weeding on my knees and that sort of thing. And I think the reason I wanted to take this class was to, I guess, hoping for some inspiration and seeing what else is out there from a sustainability perspective in terms of materiality and sort of, as Priscilla said also, sort of the conceptual groundwork. Oh, and I have to pass it on, Michelle.
Thank you. I am located on the Coast Salish lands of Salt Spring Island, which is down the road from, I believe, is Ava's Yukon, and it would be west of Toronto, way west. And I am interested. I am basically a self-learner, so I'm always learning, and I'm really interested in the environment, being surrounded by water, surrounded by the ocean, and surrounded by this beautiful forest and land that I am so fortunate to live on. I participate with the Nature Club here, so I'm out, so I'm getting a feel for the forest. And I also am part of the Royal Marine Search and Rescue group here, so I get a feeling for the water, the Pacific. So all this tied into the environment, and I'm trying to reconcile to the art that I am trying to create. And I stress the trying and the learning to create. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
And sorry, is it Michael? Is that how you say your name?
Oh, Michelle, yes.
Is Michelle?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, I did. Do you want to pick somebody? I think we've got
Boy, you're asking, that's a difficult question because I got a screen here and I will go.
Kate, Jason.
Okay, let's go to Kate. Did I get that right?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate, and I am on the occupied Nipmuc land in central Massachusetts. Grafton is the town that I live in, and I am an interdisciplinary public practitioner. Currently, I make work with trash that I find in public parks, and I usually try to do it in public space. I'm also an educator in the public schools and working to create a zero waste classroom to try to connect these ideas together. So this class was really interesting to me because I feel like I might find some support for the ideas that I'm thinking about and the ways that I'm working, and hoping to pull together some of the ideas. I'm really inspired by the Inwood reading that we had and helped make some connections already. So I'm looking forward to this. And we will go to Belinda.
Hi, my name is Belinda Klober and I go by she, her, and I'm in the San Mateo, I'm in San Mateo, which is the San Francisco Bay Area. And hang on, I'm not seeing myself. There, I'm a painter predominantly, but I do a lot of mixed media and printmaking too. I went to Kansas City Art Institute in Missouri and then spent some time in New York at Parsons School of Design. And I've been working very intensely on the climate crisis for the last maybe 7 years. I went to COP21 in Paris at a place called The Place to Be, which was a creative venue for artists and creative people. And so since then, I've been working a lot on the climate issues, but and I've been working with the Climate Reality Project and Citizens Climate Lobby and local community organizations, nonprofit organizations. I've taught in my studio and I've taught at little art schools. So I want to start teaching again in my studio. I want to make it more of an eco-arts-based practice, and I'm trying to green up my own practice. So that's why I'm taking the class. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you. And I guess, let's see, I think, is there Jason? Jason.
Hi, everyone. Jason Lindsay. I go by he, him, and I live in Illinois, about 2 hours outside of Chicago. And I am a photographer, mostly do commercial advertising photography, a lot of travel photography for my day job. And I have been involved with environmental organizations and restoration for 25 years, and really want to have been working a lot of my photo projects on environmental issues related to water and climate change. And I wanted to, I think, be a part of this class to make connections, be inspired, learn from others. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about in my work is, for whatever reason, the last 3 or 4 years, it's become super important for me to think somehow my work would actually make a difference, and not just doing work like for myself. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping to also connect with others on. I remodeled my photo studio about 16 years ago and did a green remodel and did geothermal heating and cooling. There's no fossil fuels that come into the building. And 5 years ago, we put in solar panels that provide 80% of the power. And then just this last year, we bought into a local solar, community solar project. So we're now 100% solar. And so a lot of it for me is just looking for connection and inspiration. Thank you. Let's see, is anyone left? Carol, have you went?
I think you're the last one.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's really exciting to hear how many different disciplines we have in this space together. I think there's definitely a commonality that we're all here to not just focus on the materiality of our art practice, but it's about much more than that, right? It's about like a way of being in the world and a way of relating to the world, and adjusting the priorities that often in art practices, contemporary art practices, focus on the individual. And so the classes that I've taught before, that's all why I intentionally shifted from art to like, how can we bring a socio-ecological, how can we apply a socio-ecological lens to art and art education? Because otherwise art making in the context of the Anthropocene just didn't make sense to me. And I think that we're all kind of on a similar page with that. So in this class, we are talking as much about a way of being like a frame of mind and a perspective as much about as if we are talking about like the materials we're actually going to be using. Regrettably, I don't have too much knowledge to share on sustainable approaches to photography and architecture, but that is something I'm going to look into a little more, especially knowing that there are 4 people here who are working in photography, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and share a slideshow, and well, I'll just start there. Okay. Whoops. Don't hesitate to speak up at any point. Stop me in my tracks. Let me know if you're having trouble seeing or hearing something. If you have any questions. So I'm going to do a course overview, and well, we're going to kind of play by ear. At some point, we're going to have a 5-minute bio break, I promise. Let me know if you need one sooner than when I stop. So for this class, our central hive, like where we're all going to kind of congregate in and out of, is a class Google Doc, which I've sent you guys a link to. And I just want to show you how this is laid out and field any questions. So in the class Google Doc, which if anybody has trouble accessing, please let me know. I'm going to throw the URL in the chat too right now. So I recommend bookmarking it, but I'll share it again, you know, if you have trouble finding it. So the Zoom link will always be here. You can always, it's a recurring link. You can always use the same one. I'll send it a reminder out before each class too. So we have 6 sessions for this class. And I'll kind of talk a little bit more about what each one is going to entail in the slideshow. But basically for each class, when you click on this link here, it's going to take you to the CAES website, which CAES is the nonprofit I'm partnered with, which stands for the Center for Art Education and Sustainability. And for each of those, for the first 3 classes, there is a write-up here that goes more into detail about what I'm talking about. So if you want the most you can get out of this class, I would recommend doing this reading on the side. And then in addition to the readings that I put in the Google Doc, there are more down here. And so this was all written by Yvonne, who I'll introduce in the slideshow, who created this nonprofit as part of his doctorate research in art education at the Columbia University. We are not going to be creating a blog, so you can ignore this session 1 activity. Instead, our homework this week is going to be, I have at the bottom here a contact list. So I've filled mine. It's up to you if you want to put your email in here, But what I really would like to see is a website or an Instagram or a blog, somewhere you have your work online so that we can become familiar with each other's practices. And if you don't have one yet, that's okay. But I would encourage you to create, you know, a blog, an Instagram account, just somewhere where you can start cataloging and processing and reflecting what we're doing in this class. So this week's homework is just going to be to research your fellow members here, to just sort of become familiar with each other's practices. And then in addition to that, I have 2 suggested readings. The readings are always suggested, that's not mandatory, but I recommend them, obviously. And again, if you want to get the most out of this class, I highly recommend reading them. And if you want more, I just have an excessive amount of resources and content related to this stuff. So if you'd ever like to, you know, learn more about a particular topic or a theory, just shoot me an email. So it's a 6-session class, and for sessions 2, 3, and 4, we're gonna have guest speakers who are artists from ecoartspace. And so next week is we're gonna have Michelle Brody speak to us about her practice. And so the only other thing I ask for homework is to just do a little bit of research on Michelle Brody. Like, even if you just scan her website for, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, that would be awesome. And so I have you know, Annette for the following week and Jude for the week after that. And then, as I'm gonna explain this slideshow, we're gonna move into our projects after doing some kind of research. So this is the Google Docs. So we've got the schedule, the class recordings. Once I upload them to YouTube, I will put those links in here, and this will become a hyperlink. The links in YouTube are not going to be, basically, you can only see them if you get this link. So if anybody has a problem with the links being unsolicited links and would like more privacy on, you know, if they spoke in class, they don't want people outside of this class to hear that, I think I can create a more private form of that link in YouTube. Just let me know. So yeah, contact list here. And then at the bottom of this Google Doc is a resource share. So we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. We're going to be exchanging a lot of ideas. Every person here has something to offer. You know, I by no means know everything, and every time I teach this class, I'm learning something. So as we move through the class, I invite anybody to share resources down here with any notes you may want to. And here are just some great ones from like the last class that I thought of keeping in there. Does anybody have any questions about the Google Doc?
I have a super nerd question, but
yeah,
I'm supposed to do the reading before the class or after the class?
Oh, great question. Yeah, after the class. You know, if you wanted to kickstart, I put these in here. Oh, you guys, this essay I just threw in here by William Cronin, I read it this week for a class, and I'm in an environmental justice class I'm taking, and it was I thought it was really powerful. And it's a little long. This Mapping Eco Art Ed is this is only a few pages by Hilary Inwood, who I think in this like really brief essay, Hilary just did a great job of kind of introducing you to what is the world of eco art, what is the world of eco art ed, and she talks a little bit about the history, the different approaches. So it's kind of a good place to start to give you some context for what we're kind of talking about in this class and what we're doing. it's a new field, and yet it's also an old field, and that these practices have long been in place, but it's just continuously evolving. So, you know, we're all here too to shape that field and what it even means. And yeah, and then so William Cronin just gives some background in this longer essay on the nature culture dichotomy, where and how that came from, how we consider like wilderness as you know, the pristine, untouchable form of nature that is separate from human culture in our cities. And he just really kind of lays plain how we fell into that dichotomy and how kind of toxic it is, and proposes like other ways of being in relation with the non-human world that can help, and with our own world. Essentially, he's kind of saying we need to eclipse our search for the new frontier and find the sublime within our own hearts and our like local ecosystems or ecologies, and human and non-human. So yeah, anyhow, that's just a little bit about the two readings for this next week. Any other questions?
Anna, the link, when I tried to click on the link for the Trouble with Wilderness, it needed a password.
Oh, okay. So that's where you're going to use this password.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anything that's in CAES, Yvonne puts a password on. Yeah, because these are like this is like a special section in this website that like people outside the class don't really have access to. So yeah, use that password. And if anybody has trouble with anything, let me know, like accessing anything. Any other questions?
Anna, someone also posted in the chat that we need editing access to the Google Doc in order to add our info.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I've got it. Let me see. Let me do that real quick. Whoops. Okay, now you guys should be able to edit it. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, any other questions? Speak now or do not forever hold your peace. All right, back to the slideshow. So, okay, so yeah, I mean, I kind of went over some of this already, but Center for Art Education Sustainability is this nonprofit that I'm teaching through in partnership with ecoartspace. And CAES, the Center for Art Education Sustainability, was started by Yvonne, who originally taught this course and whose framework I am building upon. And as I said, it's a living curriculum. I'm basically funneling all of my research into it. I've been taking some incredible eco art, like post-colonial, environmental justice, climate change classes the last couple of years at SAIS, at the school I'm at now. And so yeah, it's just continuously evolving. I'd love to hear if anybody feels like anything's not addressed or they want to learn more, I'm happy to do their research and look into it. So here's the schedule. So we've got, okay, so today we're doing like kind of intro to art and sustainability. And then the next two classes are going to be about art processes, like the materiality. And we'll go through several different approaches, and we'll have two different artists speaking to us. And then the third class is about objectives, relationships, and alliances. So kind of thinking through what potential alliances do I have in my context? Like who am I connected to? What's my environment? And we'll have Jude Norris come in and speak to us in this class. And then we're the last two classes are from here. You transition into your own projects, and part of this fourth class is going to be doing some writing prompts, reflecting on like what your plan and ambitions are going to be for your project. And so the the presentations for the 5th class is going to be you presenting a process that you've researched or experimented with, or yeah, and that I forgot to ask how many of you are art educators. I'm going to pause for a second. Can I see a show of hands for anybody who is an art educator? Okay. Okay, cool. This class was originally crafted to speak as much to artists as art educators. So I have a lot of stuff about art education. I'm not going to go too much into it because it's mostly artists in this class, but just to say that I have a lot to say about that. I have a lot of content around it. So if there's anything more that you want to discuss or talk about, I am very much here for that. Okay.
I had one question really quick. It says Saturday, but those dates are on Sundays, correct?
I'm so sorry. Yeah, sorry. This is these are all on Sunday. All of our classes are on Sunday. Sorry, I pulled from a previous template that I had Saturday classes on. Good catch, Jason. Okay.
Just one question on the curriculum. The readings were amazing. It was very helpful. But one thing I noticed that was kind of missing from those, and perhaps because they were earlier readings, is they really didn't get into kind of the indigenous perspective on this. And it seems like that's important to a lot of us because we all identify with what land we're on, with what unceded land we're on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Does that come up in the
Yeah.
discussion further down?
Yeah, absolutely. There's something by we're going to be reading something by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Jude Norris is also an Indigenous artist who's going to talk to us about her perspective. Being that I'm not an Indigenous, I'm not an Indigenous artist or educator. I don't like to speak to that too much for my because I just respect that it's not my perspective to speak on. But I have a lot of readings about that, and yeah, I will definitely. We have a few planned, but I'll throw a few extra in as well. Thank you for asking.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great. I'll read everything you send me on that. That'd be fantastic.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
And if you all haven't had a chance to read that book, Braiding Sweetgrass, I highly recommend it too. If you are interested in just a really good Indigenous perspective on the land.
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation to have, especially for white identifying European North American peoples inhabiting previously indigenous lands and still indigenous lands, and recognizing I think it's a lot of post-colonial studies right now. Like you hear these, there's a lot of terms like new materialism, new animism. I think they're really trying to reckon with, or at least this is something I am very much interested in trying to recognize, is the proximity between these studies and studies that have and ways of life by indigenous peoples that have long held non-anthropocentric perspectives and respecting reciprocal ecologies. So yeah, we'll definitely talk about that. So our presentations are going to be about processes, like what is the process that you're exploring, and then for the 5th session, you're going to create an art piece that you're going to present, and for the 6th session, where you're presenting an art piece, Patricia from ecoartspace and I were thinking about the possibility of inviting the ecoartspace members to join in on that last session. If anybody doesn't want to share their work with a wider community, we can arrange to have those people go first before we invite other members in. Okay, so some focal elements of this class is a scientific study of art processes. So this is to say that we're gathering information about art processes. There's so much to learn, and a great deal of it is going to be through direct relationship with materials in your specific context. So we need to put the reps in and build our knowledge, whether that's formally through documentation or intuitively through body memory. And then exploration of the natural and built environment. So understanding different approaches between working sustainably in rural and predominantly non-human settings versus working in built environments such as cities. Developing ways of thinking about art practices and sustainability. So thinking beyond art when it comes to sustainability, but also about our lifestyle, and passing this on to our students and community and future generations, intermingling the professional and the personal, interbeing and creating partnerships. So navigating towards reciprocal relationships with our environment and our community, assessing the needs and assets of yourself, your community, and the environment. So like they can provide this, I can provide that. What happens if we get together, you know? 4, which is actually 5 on here. Establishing connections between art and education for sustainable development. So art and education for sustainable development have a lot of bridging to do culturally. There's a lot of speculative writing on this, but there's a lot less practice to show for it. So, you know, I invite you guys to think like, what do we have to consider and how can we contribute each in our own way? And then the last one, providing artists and art educators with professional development so they can develop sustainable practices in autonomy. And that's, you know, basically what we're here to do. I'm not going to bother reading this because we're going to just go right into it. So what is sustainability? The next slide is the most commonly referred to definition for sustainability that Yvonne collected from a United Nations Assembly. Could somebody read this? You can just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sustainability means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs.
So how does this definition sit with you guys? Is there anything?
I think it's, I like it, but it doesn't encompass other creatures in the world. It's more just about people. And I think we need to also think about other creatures and other animals and not just people. So
Yeah, that came up for me too.
It also feels extractive, right? So even though it's sort of acknowledging that there are limitations, there is an inherently extractive understanding about how meeting our own needs gets done. So it feels very limited in that regard as well.
Mm-hmm.
I like how I hear what everyone else is saying, and I appreciate those additions. But I do, the thing I really like about this is it's making us each take personal responsibility. You know, I think we've all read about, you know, these small things that we can do. You know, do they matter? Do they all add up? Are they important? Or should we be focusing on like these big oil companies and, you know, these major things? But I believe, and I'm guessing most of us do, if we're here, that like our individual lifestyles and the way we create our art does matter. And so I like that. It's not sort of letting anybody off the hook.
Whoops, wonderful. Thank you guys for sharing. Whoops, sorry. Yeah, so we need to think of sustainability in a holistic way, as some of you are pointing out, as connected to the social, the economic, the cultural, and the non-human. So how and when did we start thinking about sustainability? I think it's important to note that many indigenous cultures, for instance, have lived within their means and, where possible, continue to today. The concept of sustainability is a more recent development responding to the rise of unsustainable practices amidst human population growth, resulting in loss of biodiversity and a destabilizing climate. None of this, I'm sure, is new to you guys. So historical background and the function of art. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about this. And Yvonne goes into some further detail of some of the things I'm going to point out on the CAES website in the readings for session 1. So the materials used to make art throughout history reflect a culture's relationship to the landscape and access to materials. So, you know, if you're looking at art throughout history prior to the modern era, you obviously see the colors are far more muted. They're like an earth palette, and they're specific to the bioregion that art was made prior to global trade. So, for example, we have these caves that go back tens of thousands of years, right? So every culture and civilization before the Industrial Revolution developed artistic processes in relation to its climate, generally using local materials that tie to the purpose of what is being made. So here are 2 examples of cave paintings from 10 to 20,000 years ago in northern Spain and Argentina. They're evidence that our species has been exploring painting processes for at least tens of thousands of years. It is only recently that we have become so removed from the processes of making art materials. You know, we go to the art store, we go to the store and we buy supplies. This is a recent development, and similar to, you know, so many other aspects of our lifestyle these days. Like, I'm thinking about medicine, or our access to medicine. We're so ingrained in the convenience of just sort of going to the store and buying these things that we're so removed from the actual source of what we're using, for example, as art materials. And because we're just so used to this convenience, it feels impossible to make art materials from the landscape. That feels like something that's you know, such a hassle. How do I even go there? But it's something we've been doing for tens of thousands of years, you know, so we're more than capable of doing it. I think the bigger issue is that the processes that are traditionally you know, passed down through generations and you know, in making circles, we've kind of lost that. So that's sort of what we have to try to put a little extra work in to revive and also find and create new processes. So here's some more examples. The Egyptians had an almost unchanged 3,000-year-long tradition of watercolor painting on mud plaster walls, which is pretty cool. There's a great documentary, and Candace, because I know you mentioned you're interested in, or you work with like calligraphy, printmaking. I think you'll in particular find these documentaries really interesting. I put the link to these episodes in the homework for next week, but feel free to go ahead and, you know, watch them sooner. They're really well done Nova documentaries about it is about language and alphabet, but with that, I didn't quite appreciate how much the spread of writing and language is hinged throughout history on our ability to write and to pass on words, which is all about materiality. And so, yeah, this is quite fascinating, very much related to this class. So yeah, kind of going through, so some of the oldest written accounts in the Western canon of art materials and techniques come from first century classical Greece through Pliny and Vitruvius. Artists in the Western canon have long referred to the writings of Pliny and Vitruvius to reclaim old world techniques to working with materials. Now we're in an era where we have access to mass information, so it's easier to find a variety of recipes.
You're breaking up. We can't really hear you.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
I can hear you just fine.
You can, because I think whoever said that, their audio is actually breaking out, so I wonder if it might be a connection on your end.
Yeah, I heard you just fine too without any breakup.
Okay. If you are having a poor connection, this is being recorded, so
thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, so now we're in an era where we have access to mass information, so it's easier to find a lot of recipes for like a specific medium or craft, like gilding, for example. But you also have a lot of recipes out there that are far less researched than you might find in some of these old texts. Because nowadays artists are making their own materials as a hobby, and maybe they're posting those recipes as well researched. They're kind of suggesting that, but they might only work under the conditions of that particular bioregion, right? So I haven't read Pliny myself, but I've heard from a previous student that his reading is quite dry. He describes just enough of the materials, where it came from, what they did, what it looked like, for people that have that for people to have that foundation from the first century onwards, especially for example, plaster making and clay, which are still being used in the same way. So then there's Cennini, who's perhaps the most significant documentation of art. This book is perhaps the most significant documentation of art processes that came out of the turn of the 15th century. And it's a 189 chapter book that has been the main reference for understanding the chemistry and reasoning behind art processes of medieval artists. Similarly, Giorgio Vasari documented essential painting processes and materials used by the Italian masters during the Renaissance. And this is stuff that Yvonne goes into a little bit more in detail in on the course website. So artists have to, okay, so designing, so then we started designing for expediency, coming in towards the modern era. Art and science had walked together for centuries, but artists largely produced their own materials up until industrialization. Artists began to lose knowledge of what goes into art materials and the properties that define their qualities. So, you know, a lot. So if you are just learning how to make your own paint, you know, you're gonna have to put a lot of work into to get the specific quality that you ultimately might be after. It's just going to take a lot of experimentation. The production of oil paint tubes eventually allowed impressionists to paint nature from observation in faster ways. So art began to move towards abstract ideas, conceptuality, and aesthetic values, emphasizing individualism. So, so yeah, now we are seeing, you know, with chemical processes, much brighter colors. That is definitely a development of the modern era. These are pictures taken from Kramer pigments, which I'll tell you guys about later. So yeah, you know, here are some examples of artists who brought their paint tubes out into the field, and they're out there painting nature. Two of my favorite paintings. And so, you know, I wanted to I wanted to just sort of highlight the kind of like legacy of anthropocentric thinking, just sort of just a little bit, to appreciate like how, because you know, the art market and the role of art today as it functions in like popular contemporary culture is often, I would personally argue, lifting up sort of individualist, extractive, like kind of potentially harmful perspectives often. There are many artists that are questioning this, and you know, that's always been the role of art, is like showing culture to itself and questioning it. But I think a lot of the practice, the structures that are in place to present art to the world, I'm thinking of like the gallery system, are still caught up in some problematic practices. So I just wanted to also point to the fact that some of the material that I'm going over now comes from one of my teachers, Giovanni Alloy, and he created, he founded this this magazine that I think you guys would probably be into, called Antennae. It's a journal of nature and visual culture. And there are like back issues here that it's all free and access to the public. But yeah, so anyhow. Okay, so, you know, thinking about legacies of anthropocentrism in the Western canon, right? And like thinking of coming out of Europe, then the spread of colonialism. So way back in like 300 BC, we had, oh, how did I say his name? Ptolemy, geocentric model. So, you know, thinking about like how ancient European civilizations, Aristotle and classical Greece, and Ptolemy in Rome and Egypt understood their place in the universe as being like center. They're the center of the universe. Heliocentrism, which is seeing the sun as the center, later became a major blow to religious teachings that claim the opposite. And then, you know, we've got in Plato and Aristotle, like, you know, some foundational philosophers of you know, European thinking. So there's this notion of the great chain of being. This is so the idea that it's a hierarchical structure of all matter and life, thought by medieval Christianity to have been decreed by God. So you've got man, and then you've got the angels, and then you have God, and below man is the animals, below the animals are the plants, and below the plants are the minerals. So it's a very much hierarchical thinking, right? This chain begins with God and descends through angels, humans, animals, and plants to minerals. And yeah, so this is derived from Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, and Proclus. And it was developed during the Middle Ages. And then, you know, you have the birth of humanism, right? So like humanism is a philosophical stance that emphasizes the individual and social potential and the agency of human beings. It considers human beings as the starting point for serious moral and philosophical inquiry. So the emphasis is on education, reason, individualism, and a strong belief in the universal human nature, differentiating us from nature, right? This is like the dichotomy of art and nature, human, non-human, man, animal. These all kind of get strengthened through the era of humanism. And then, you know, coming out of that, makes sense that individualism comes through as like the moral stance, political philosophy, ideology, and social outlook that emphasizes the intrinsic worth of the individual. Individualists promote the exercise of one's goals and desires to value independence and self-reliance, and advocate that interests of the individual should achieve precedence over the state or a social group while opposing external interference upon one's own interest by society or institutions such as the government. And then we have post-humanism, right? This is kind of the hot topic these days. So humanism proposes to, post-humanism, by the way, has many definitions. But post-humanism replaces humanism with an idea of interconnectedness, new concepts of network systems. For a while, it has been predominantly a discourse that has developed in very Western and white-centric cultural realities. One of my current like research questions is, because I do so much reading on this stuff, and it's like my question that I'm not often enough seeing met or discussed is what about ontological perspectives outside of the Western canon that have long decentered the human, and how do we sort of ethically engage with those in like Western systems of thinking. And so, you know, also we're beginning to now to think beyond the canon. So what cultural idea, we're like beginning to ask more, it's, you know, people have long been doing this, but I think it's right now it's becoming more of a wider conversation of asking the question of what cultural ideologies are we on the receiving end of, and how are they like consciously or unconsciously shaping us and our biases. How has progress and individualism shaped our understanding of nature and art and the ways that we relate to each other in the non-human world? The history of art is commonly studied in Western institutions, consisted of predominantly white male artists. However, in the era of Black, queer, indigenous, disability, and eco-activism, the historically exclusive canon of art history is being critically reevaluated. And so I love this term that I came across called the pluriverse. So imagining, again, not like a hierarchy, like we're evolving on to the next best thing, but it's like accepting a more complex way of being in and with the world, with other cultures, and with other entities. So pluriversal, so a world in which diverse hopes can be sown, multiple opportunities can be cultivated, and a plurality of meaningful lives can be achieved by the richly different and caring people we are. There are many alternatives to the domineering, profiteering, globalizing, disempowering progress of the West. And then you have, sorry, we're going to take a break shortly, I promise. I'm almost done with the historical background here. And a theorist that has been influential for me, or like just a term that I have found really helpful in understanding the shifts that are happening right now, is this art historian Claire Bishop, who talks about the social turn, which points to the emerging shift within the art world towards the social sphere. The shift is not necessarily a new art movement, but it's rather a new social order that emphasizes participation, challenges power, and spans disciplines. And again, none of this stuff is new, right? But it is new in the sense that it's happening on a wider scale. So the point is not to destroy a wider scale in the modern era. The point is not to destroy art, but exercise the capacity for art to blur into the everyday, to participate in life. Art may be becoming the new place to learn civics. As the social and political systems in place fail to meet people's needs amidst an encroaching reality of a destabilizing climate, a critical need for self-determined sociality grows. So like governments are failing to meet our needs. Like some of the systems in place are starting to collapse a little bit. And so you have a lot of artists who are coming in to fill those gaps where the government isn't able to do it. The hard thing is that you have there's a lot of instability in this for the artists. Like a lot of artists these days are having to rely on grants that are put out by the government to say like, hey, instead of figuring out how to meet the social needs ourselves, we're going to kind of put out a bunch of grants out there and let artists figure it out. So artists are turning their attention regardless, one way or the other, many artists are turning their attention towards community solidarity issues such as food security, clothing, education, and housing. And this isn't just happening in the arts, but I think the arts is a critical place where it is happening because the arts influence culture. And then, okay, so if anybody wants some good reading, this is a fantastic book to start with. Decolonizing Nature, Contemporary Art and the Politics of Ecology. I just really enjoy TJ Demos, who wrote this, and the way that he writes about this book. He has several lectures online, but he's kind of he's stressing the importance of intersectional thinking in the art sphere. So not just thinking about the ecological and social justice, like applying that to the realm of art. Art doesn't make sense without those things if we understand what is really going on in our context right now of, you know, socio-ecological unraveling. And he talks about a lot of artists who are doing this work. There's a lot, you know, there are critiques about him that are great. That, you know, everybody's missing something. You know, we're all kind of working at this together as a community. So, but I find some of his thinking really helpful. And the artists and other, you know, artists, thinkers that he's pointing to, scientists are helpful. So yeah, pointing out the failure to recognize and address the intersection of the social, the political, and the ecological and environmental art.
Demos also wrote a book called Against the Anthropocene, which I highly recommend, in which he really takes to task a lot of the terminology that we throw around the era, or how we create nomenclature for the era and the times that we are living in. That one was also really good.
Would you mind throwing that name in the chat?
Yeah, it's just his other book. Like, it's like the book that came out before. Yeah, I'll add it in there.
Awesome. So, you know, a big, and then branching right off of that, we're talking about environmental justice. So a social movement that focuses on the fair distribution of environmental benefits and burdens. And this is something I think too that is, that Cronin helps put into context in the reading this week. An interdisciplinary body of social science literature that includes theories of the environment and justice, environmental laws and their implementations, environmental policy and planning on governance for development and sustainability, and political ecology. So I think that it's really important to understand in an eco-art context the history of racism that is behind the environmental movement. I have a lot of readings about this, and I think it's just something that's really good to be aware of. Not only to like inform ways that we move forward and understand these concepts, but also just sort of to understand how things have come to be the way that they are right now. And you know, environmental justice is essentially saying you know, that homeless man on the side of my street, that is an environmental crisis, right? We're not just talking like the environmental activism has you know, particularly speaking to North American context, has long been kind of white-led and only thinking about like the non-human world, and particularly thinking about that non-human world as being like the wild that is only relegated off to these national parks, where, you know, we've kicked off the indigenous peoples and they're seen as these like pristine like pieces of land that this is something that Cronin talks all about in the reading this week. So so you'll get a lot more from there. And then coming from this the term environmental racism, so the exclusion of people of color from policy making, the deliberate targeting of these communities for toxic waste disposal, and the official sanctioning of life-threatening poisons and pollutants. So now we're gonna take a bio break. It's 2:17. Why don't we come back at 2:25? And Does anybody have any questions so far? Sorry, that was a lot. Today's a lot.
I just wanted to make one note. I'm pretty sure that the notes in the chat disappear after the class is ended. So if anybody wants that info, they should copy it. And
Yeah, and something I often do is I'll put the some things that were mentioned in the resources at the bottom of the Google Doc. So I'll do that for the notes in the chat.
I think there's a way that you can save the chat.
Yeah, you can also save the chat by I think you hit yeah, the 3 dots in the bottom right corner and then hit save chat. And you know, I think we're doing pretty good on timing actually. Why don't we come back at 3:30 and give our eyes a little bit of a break. I've been going very fast too, so just sort of take a breather. All right, I'll see you guys shortly.
You want to get out? You locked yourself in. Come on.
Thanks for sharing about the flag project, Tracy.
It'll be interesting to hear if they actually use sustainable materials to actually make those flags. But we'll see.
Yeah, somebody said something interesting to me the other day. I think it was actually Giovanni, the teacher I was mentioning earlier, that we're just in such a place right now where there's so much learning that has to be done about like our ways of being in the world that artists aren't necessarily the ones who should be the first to buckle down on like what materials they're using if they to get a message out. I think that there's some give and take around the how helpful or not of a statement that is. Like
I think that maybe because I'm a cynical New Yorker, but I feel like there's so many people who are trying so hard to create work and food and things for the world that are really sustainably based, but there's also just a whole lot of corporate people who are just like sticking a tree on their packaging and putting a recycle symbol and trying to like make money off of looking like they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So I feel like, oh, it's so exciting people are doing this, but like, are they doing it in a good way? I just feel like I'm constantly questioning that.
Yeah.
That's so funny you say that, because I was at the grocery store the other day and there were some garbage bags that looked like they were, sustainably made and everything. And then you looked closer and they were like, you can recycle the garbage bags. So, yeah. I mean, how can you recycle garbage bags?
Yeah. I mean, I read a statistic the other day that said, I might be getting the numbers off a little bit, but like something like 50% of people are willing to pay more for goods that are environmentally better in some way. And so manufacturers are like, whoa, this is a bandwagon. But it said 98% of the products out there are like falsely green. Like
that's
so
yeah, they call it the green premium. Pay the green premium.
Yeah, greenwashing is a very real
greenwashing. Yes, greenwashing.
Yeah, but capital is definitely following the trend and taking advantage of labeling something green wherever they can, because but I think where it's convenient is that what are more sustainable practices the consumers are trending towards sustainable practices, which means that the pressure is on for designers and corporations to figure that out. A lot of them have not, and they're still very much in the process of figuring that out on so many fronts. And yeah, there's a lot to say about all of that. I love discussions. I'm sorry that this class is so me lecturing, but I think discussions are the best. Please barge in at any moment with any comments. So there's actually a slide later about like what are the myths and misconceptions of sustainable practices, and that's pretty much what definitely I was trying to point to, is this notion of like greenwashing. So I'm just going to run through some like concepts that might be helpful for us in just sort of thinking about reframing our perspective, or I'm sure many of these concepts are not new to you guys. For anyone who is a practicing artist or writing grants or working in an educational context, some of these concepts might be helpful to flag for writing about the work that you're doing and advocating for it. So I'll just sort of run through a few things. Ecological knowledge is a is a lived process of knowing that has extraordinary ramifications for individuals and communities in terms of what is important, what struggles people engage in, and how the earth is manifest in their values, sense of identity, and culture. So like how something I would encourage you all to consider in your practice, if you're not already, is what kind of ecological knowledge are you passing on through your work, or are you thinking about through your work? On a community level, ecological knowledge might entail making connections, building upon existing networks, publicly assessing unmet community needs and shedding light on community offerings, and on a perhaps non-human level, shedding light on shedding light on the history and health of our non-human environment and our human environment. Understanding the history of where we are and our bioregion is really important to being in eco artist. There are so many different words for like quote eco artist, but to use that for now. But yeah, really getting a handle on like what is your context that you are working in, right? So the practices that we're going to be talking about in this class, even say paint making or dye making, they're going to be different for every person's context. Building relationships and alliances are going to be different for every person's context. So a lot of the work is really like thinking on local scales and doing the research, like who are the peoples that were there before you, where are they now, what connections do you have around you, what here listening and researching is a huge part of the practice that I would hope for you to engage with in over the next few weeks. Bioregionalism, if you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. Wendell Berry. Bioregionalism addresses, and so a bioregion is sort of like identifying a region by its geological features, perhaps, or its ecological features. Bioregionalism addresses the interplay between the individual, the community, and the environment. So it's not just the non-human and the animal; it's the human as well. And an individual, especially now, where so much of our human infrastructure is entangled with the non-human landscapes. We are actively like shaping moving waterways, shaping landscapes. Anyhow, just to say that we're also entangled. On an individual level, the hope is to expand one's ecological cultural identity in a way that feeds back into the health and the well-being of their community and environment. So in a global era, I just really lift up the notion of getting to know one's bioregion, because we're kind of entering into this era of homogenized culture. Like everything's kind of becoming the same everywhere. There's not like a uniqueness of location. And I think focusing on smaller systems and local scales really combats that and creates like a unique, genuine community and culture. So place-based education, I know there's a few educators in here. I have a lot of readings around place-based education.
We won't. Anna, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but where was that graphic from in the previous slide?
I think that was from, I think I found that on the Planet Drum website, which is Planet Drum is I don't want to do a disservice to describing this project properly, but it's a project that came about on the West Coast near, I think it came out of, I forget what region, but it was started by a few artists and environmentalists in the 70s, I believe, and they did a lot of projects around that that brought artists and maybe even like scientists, educators, local community together to work on like whatever it may be, building a garden and also like mapping ecological assets in the area and getting to know your region better. And they provided a lot of resources for others to do this in their own context. But it's quite dormant now. The man who created the whole thing, I think his name is Peter something, has passed away, and his wife mainly now runs the show. I talked to her somewhat recently. She's wonderful. But yeah, sorry. Long story short, Planet Drum, and I'll type that in the chat real quick. I'm quite sure that's where I got this graphic from.
Thanks. It just looks like a really interesting graphic, especially in terms of illustrating or helping to delineate bioregions. So if it's accurate in any way, it's interesting. Thanks.
You know, yeah, that's actually something that I've had trouble tracking down, is like a distinct mapping of bioregions. I haven't really come across one that is, there isn't a uniform one, essentially, that I have come across. It seems to be a lot of like local scale ideas or proposals for what like a bioregion might entail. So if you get more information, I would love to learn more or see your maps. Yeah, so then thinking about place-based education, cultivating connection between schools and community and the environment. Again, talking about like homogenized culture, education is often happening in a way where we have standard curricula that are passed down and taught through schools, and often we're not really thinking about like how does what we're learning in school connect to what is outside of school? How is this relevant to the lives of the students that are learning? So so some characteristics of place-based learning is thinking about content that is specific to geography, ecology, sociology, politics, art of that region. Inviting like practitioners or local community members in, instructional practices that incite student initiative responsibility. So students actually beginning to take a stake in the culture around them, out doing work outside of the school, engaging the talent and expertise of adults outside of the school, building a real life experience, not abstraction. It's multidisciplinary, experiential, and participatory, and it expands one's ecological cultural identity. And so as artists too, right, like these are all things that are relevant as artists interested in the socio-ecological sphere. These are all things that are also part of what we might be thinking about in our practice. And I also wanted to highlight just sort of thinking about cultural sustainability as something that we might be striving for if we're working in community contexts. So the maintaining of cultural beliefs, cultural practices, heritage conservation, culture as its own entity, and attempts to answer the question of whether or not any given cultures will exist in the context of the future. I pulled this term from a great essay that I read recently. That's a study that came out of the, I think it's the Laplands up in Norway. It was a study that was done with the indigenous peoples there, creating craft circles. And you know, when you're working intergenerationally in communities, that is the opportunity to pass on traditions. So how do we, as say educators or even artists, create the opportunity for that to happen? All the magic happens when where the gossip happens, when you're just hanging out. Integral transformative learning. So integral transformative learning is a term, I'm pretty sure it came from this guy, Edmund O'Sullivan, who I think is working up in Canada. He's got like an ITL institute of some sort up there, I believe. So thinking about all human dimensions, there's a great essay by Bell Hooks about this too, and she like points to Thich Nhat Hanh's holistic perspective of thinking about like the body, the vital, the heart, the mind, and consciousness, invited to are all together invited to co-creatively participate in the unfolding of learning and inquiry. So again, whether it's through education or through your own personal art practice, we're obviously thinking beyond just the studio, right? We're like, I think our art is speaking to the wider context outside of the studio. So deep, constructive, and meaningful learning that supports critical ways in which learners consciously make meaning of their lives. And meaning making, just even that phrase, is something that I'm constantly coming back to again and again and again in my personal practice. And it's just sort of at the core of everything. Like, how do we make meaning of our lives? And I think that that's something that a lot of people in this kind of era where we're facing a lot of problems that we need to kind of feel like we need to quickly solve. And a lot of people feel very lost right now. And I think meaning making is sort of the core thing that I keep coming back to. And how do I find and make meaning? And it always, for me personally, and a lot of people I've read and personal and people that I know and work with, it really comes down to connecting to beyond self, like connecting to, actually there's a diagram I'm going to come to shortly that will better describe this. Sorry, not to jump from one thought to the next too fast. So then thinking about metaphorically, the idea of composting is something that I'm very inspired by. The process wherein old food scraps are transformed, rearranged, and renewed into rich soil. This is a great metaphor for how we might not only be with, but thrive under the circumstances of limitation, transitioning out of ways that no longer serve us, our community, or our environment. We're kind of in an era where we're facing a lot of endings, right? And so I think a lot of people in our culture, the culture that I'm speaking from at least, is not too sound in how to be with death and endings and change. This is a time of change, and this is what this class is all about. This is how do we change? How do we move towards reciprocal ecologies of care, right? Change is not comfortable. Death is not comfortable. But I think the process of composting as a metaphor is something that is really helpful to think about, because you're literally taking the old, and it is dying, but it's rearranging, and it's becoming the soil, the fertile soil from which new life grows. So accepting endings and change, and that being the bedrock from which we generate new modes of being and relating to, which gets into the term transformative criticism. Again, this is coming from Edmund O'Sullivan and the integral transformative learning concept. So transformative criticism is a restructuring of and rupture with old ways to set the stage for new emergent ways. So it's defined by Edmund O'Sullivan as a form of criticism that calls into question the fundamental mythos of the dominant cultural form, and indicates that the culture can no longer viably maintain its continuity and vision, maintaining that the dominant culture is no longer formatively appropriate. So this just helps articulate the necessary shifts that I think we need to make as a culture around how we relate to the world, and not just to materials, but also, our pace and our perspective. I personally think of this as like a spirit project, thinking about what are the necessary adaptations to inherited means of being in the world that a culture or a society or an individual has to make to take up psychosocial well-being. What do we need to get healthy again? And we have a lot that involves a lot of listening to your place. What does your place need? What is it asking for? yeah, I just talked about that. So, okay, so sustainability, an issue.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
before you move on?
Yeah, definitely.
You were talking about this integral transformative learning, and it sounds like a lot of us are trying to think about our meaning and our practice and what it means and how to make our practice more meaningful. And I'm interested if people have any thoughts on we create that own meaning for ourselves, but then we go out into the world and we show our work to other people, and perhaps we have this goal of you know, communicating to the world about climate change or sustainability or this. Do people have any thoughts about sort of how one does that without sounding didactic about it? So then, you know, we're talking to the greater world who maybe isn't as invested in this, and how we can do that without like making people just, you know, zone out and think, oh, you know, like this is just too much information, or it's like too boring or upsetting, or like how to communicate without like killing the communication to the receiver. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that, or if I've actually even said that in a way that makes sense.
That's something that I struggle with myself. Oh, I'm sorry. Who did I interrupt?
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead, Candace.
I totally think about that all the time because I'm so concerned with creating a sense of deep ecology in my own work. And then it seems very, very important to me. And so I think that the tone when discussing it with others, even outside of the art context, can feel evangelical or even pushy. And then that really turns people off. You know, that really doesn't work well. But what I'm challenging myself to do is to become more curious and to share things more as inspiration points than to try to convert, right? Like you're an ambassador for these ideas, and you're creating an inspiration point, but you're not converting somebody. And again, not something I'm good at. Something that I'm learning to get into.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that by saying, yeah, you're walking a fine line between proselytizing and alienating people and trying to educate. So I've been really looking at it through the lens of just educating and almost a little entertaining. I mean, on my Instagram, I'm always posting about a reforestation project that I'm in the midst of, and just really trying to encourage people to, you know, how easy it is to grow trees. And I specialize in like native oak trees. And so I announced like planting days, and I'm going to be going out and planting acorns and whatever. And I'm surprised by how many people have been like, I'd love to do it with you and stuff like that. So trying to educate gently, I guess, is what I'm suggesting.
I struggle with that too, and I think a lot of people do. I mean, even just in the general community, they want to do something and they don't know how to move beyond the influx of massive data and trying to approach it in an emotional aspect gets to some people, but then they're not able to move beyond grief and despair. So I've found that the more that I can use my community to actually come at it from different angles, you know, that brings a perspective of hope and renewal and, you know, even joy in our practice, that actually brings people in. And I learn so much from just the way that other people are approaching completely outside the typical discussion of climate change, but from more grassroots efforts that are occurring in the real world too. So that's just my perspective.
I think it's a really interesting question. I think about that a lot too. And I think a lot of writers I've read are trying to deal with this idea between dystopia and utopia, or not that utopia will ever exist, but how do you engage people in a way where they will kind of transform themselves is a really very important question. And not like I think sometimes art can be so you feel, you feel kind of not so much in the head of the artist that it's not easily communicated to the individual, the meaning. If they spend just a minute looking at a piece, they may not get it. So it has to draw them in right away so that they want to engage with it more, especially if it's something as complex as and difficult as the environmental issues. So
I know it's something. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, and I'm done. I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking a lot more about. It's definitely wasn't my strong suit in the past. I think I got very evangelical, and I've been thinking a lot. I live in a rural community with a lot of agriculture and farming, and I feel like a lot of I'm giving some context for something I'm going to talk about related. So the project is related to agriculture and climate change, and I've been thinking a lot about how can I make an individual contribution different than others based on my own world that I live in. And I feel like a lot of the climate work I see being done in the arts and even environmental community is based on the coasts and oceans and mountains, and not necessarily in the Midwest. And it's a particularly tough audience to talk to about that stuff with farmers. And so I did a project recently, and I have talked to a few farmers about it in my beginnings of trying to understand this. And what I have found working the best is to have a really open conversation where I just open the door to the conversation and I give a super basic explanation of my work. And then I try to ask a lot of questions and have an empathetic kind of conversation with them. So my goal is to start a conversation instead of change them. And I've found that to be working better. I also come out of those discussions much less stressed and pissed off.
Oh, I hear that, Jason, as an educator. I think you do always run, you don't want to proselytize, you don't want to take up the savior complex. I think you can only really educate somebody if you really understand where they're coming from. Nobody wants to be told what to do, right? But if you start asking questions and then, just coming from a place of curiosity, I always find is the best place to start. Like, because I think any one of us, as my personal philosophy is that anybody has only come to the perspective that they've come to as a consequence of what they've encountered throughout their life. And so a lot of times it's just a matter of, we all make personal decisions too, of course, but a lot of times it's a matter of lack of exposure to diversity or diverse ways of thinking, or see, our culture is set up so that we are able to be so blind from our impact existentially and materially, right? Even if you think of the meat industry, we all eat so much meat, but we are so removed from the death processes of those animals, right? And so a lot of times it's just about asking questions and getting to understand who are you, first of all, who are you trying to educate, and where are they coming from? Where's their perspective? How did they come to have this perspective? And sometimes teaching, or sometimes the most effective way of teaching is just through example too. Just by doing what you're doing and letting it have its impact on you psycho-spiritually, that's contagious. People see that, they see you planting a tree and what that's doing to your mind, body, and soul, and they're like, oh, I need some of that medicine, man. I should check that out.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we have to do the work that we have to do, and lead by example. We never know when someone's noticing what we do or noticing what the art is doing. We can be really blind to the light bulbs that go off in other people's heads. And I also want to say, I'm not sure that proselytizing is such a bad thing. I mean, if that's what comes naturally to you, that seems to me okay, because there are people who will respond to that, just like there are others who might respond to a different way. I just think there's so much out there and so many of us out there in all ways, I think it's great to always be looking for ways to create different ways of presenting our work, so that we can get broader audiences and touch more people. I mean, it comes down to that thing. I'm not an educator, but I know there's a whole thing about teaching that some people learn by hearing, some people learn by seeing, some people learn by embodiment. So I think if we think about all those things as artists when we're creating whatever projects we're creating, I mean, that's another way of looking at it. Like, how do I want people to learn, or how can I make learning about what I'm trying to say accessible to a wider range of people, like inclusivity and diversity being a part of that as well within the language of the world we live in right now. But it's a big question. So I think there are a lot of answers.
In the Climate Reality Project, they do a really good job of training people to talk about the climate crisis with other people. And one of the things they say is to tell your story, because people can't dispute your story. So nobody's gonna say your story is not true, because that's just not, just don't do that. So if you tell it from your own perspective and you talk about what you're doing, what I'm doing, and reframe it to, I'm doing this rather than you should do that. Because anytime you say you need to change, that feels like an attack on the person. So I think it's really important to reframe it in that this is what I do. This is who I am. Not that, and it is an important paradigm shift in thinking that we need to focus on, everybody needs to focus on changing themselves too, rather than saying, oh, those big corporations, they need to change. They do need to change, but if they all decide, if they see, it kind of becomes a domino effect. The more people change individually, the more the culture and the society will change collectively.
I love that emphasis on storytelling. I think that's yeah, I was gonna say that as well. And maybe you're also telling the story of a bioregion or the history of a place, you know. I think that's another really effective tool that works much better than telling somebody that they have to change and how they have to change, but like letting them just sort of telling them the story of, you know, how you know, just sort of the story of damage or hurt perhaps, and then we all trusting in the human heart to make decisions from there, you know.
I can say, I was just going to say, I can say with an area that I have seen myself make, I feel like the biggest noticeable impact in, related to sharing your own story, has nothing to do with art. It has to do with the solar panels on my house and business. And there's been 5 people that have installed solar based on our conversations. And another friend of mine owns 4,000 apartment units, and he's now installing solar on every single building he owns based on our conversations. And they definitely were just sharing my own excitement, enthusiasm. And that's one of the reasons that I'm trying to start taking my discussions about my art more in that direction and less about proselytizing.
Thank you everyone for your thoughts. Like, the class is totally worth it, just if it's only today. Like, I mean, to be able to feel like you can put something you're struggling with out there to the group, and like 6 people say such insightful, thoughtful things, and everyone is struggling with the same issue. It's fantastic. So thank you all for your thoughts.
Can I quickly share a practice that I really admire of an artist that's directly related to your wonderful question, Tracy, which I also think about all the time and struggle with. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Adrienne Jenek. She's actually a member of ecoartspace, and she lives in the Southwest, and she made a deck of tarot-based cards called the Eco Tarot. And so, you know, they have their own suits, but they're all related to nature, climate change, sustainability. And what she does is she offers readings to people, which is how I met her. She was in New York for the Creative Time Summit and doing readings. And so you can ask her any question related to something that you're thinking about that has to do with Earth sustainability, climate change, your ways of being or whatever, just has to be related. And then she does a reading and you have a conversation. And yeah, it's very meaningful.
You put the name of that artist and the maybe the name of the deck in the chat?
Yes,
awesome.
I will.
Thank you so much. That was such a good question. Thank you for posing that. That really great dialogue that came from it. It is past 4, so if anybody has to go, by all means, feel free. I'm just going to wrap up with like 2 or 3 more slides around. Sorry, one second. Circular system thinking. So I just wanted to plant the seed of, again, thinking about the local and the global. Actually, we're going to come back to circular thinking in our materials class, but I just wanted to show this graph to you guys and just sort of plant this seed in your head and thinking about your practice. So you have, the self, and then the community, the wider circle, and then the wider up from that you have society, and then you have the environment. So, and maybe, your practice is really quite insular and you're working in, small scale in your studio, and it's maybe you're just, and maybe you're thinking about the environment. So maybe you're kind of just in dialogue between the self and the environment, but and that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to just sort of plant this seed as a diagram to begin asking the question of how is my practice entangled with my community, my society, and my environment. And that's something just to let percolate over the next few weeks. And we'll end there for today. It's been such a rich class, and my favorite parts were the dialogue that happened. Great question, and I love questions. I welcome questions from anybody at any time, and I think that there's so many insightful perspectives here, and hearing from each other is really great. So please do take the time to check out each other's work. And just sort of see who's in this class, what kind of work are we doing. In the past, collaborations have happened too for projects, so that's definitely something that you could consider. And thinking about community and society, like there's the people in this group too, right? Not just thinking on, now that we're in this digital era, we have these tools to expand our sense of community and collaborators. So yeah, I'm gonna put some note, what was put in the chat. I'm gonna save that file, and I'll drop you guys an email when I upload the recording for this class. It'll probably be in the next day or 2. Any questions, comments, concerns?
I guess I just wanted to say one thing about, I don't know if everybody here came to this through ecoartspace, but if you are not a member of ecoartspace, it's a great organization. The Facebook group and the discussions they have through Zoom and stuff are really nice. So
I think we all are ecoartspace members. I think this is like just the ecoartspace.
Yeah, this class
class
is pitched just to ecoart members.
Which is really cool. It's like so nice to be in community with a few others. I only joined like a year ago. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, and please just reach out if you have any, if you want to learn more about any particular topic that we've discussed, or have any questions that you'd like me to like percolate on, do a little more research on it. I love that. And yeah, bid you all a great weekend, remainder of your weekend.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.